The silence was the first sign of wrongness. Not an absence of sound, but a presence. A heavy, listening void that swallowed the chirp of crickets and the rustle of autumn leaves, leaving only the frantic thumping of Arthur Penn's own heart. He stood among the decaying concrete domes of the TNT area, the air growing thick and cold, pressing in on him. A sudden, crushing pressure built behind his eyes, the kind you feel in a deep mine. He looked up, a mistake he would regret for the rest of his life. Against the sliver of moon, there was a tear in the fabric of the night, a shape, impossibly large, man-like but fundamentally not a man, its colossal wings folded like a shroud of absolute black. For a frozen second, his reporter's mind tried to file it away. An owl, a trick of the light, but the universe refused to cooperate. And then the eyes ignited. 2 points of crimson light, not reflecting, but burning from within the darkness. They weren't angry. They weren't hungry. They were something far worse. They were filled with a deep, cosmic grief, a sorrow so profound it drilled into his soul and made a mockery of his own petty miseries. A high-pitched, metallic shriek ripped through the air, a sound of grinding metal and a dying bird that bypassed his ears and clawed directly at his brain. He didn't run. His legs were stone. He just stood there in the West Virginia dark, a cynical man whose entire reality had just been murdered by a pair of sad red eyes. It was a hell of a long way from a joke assignment. 3 days. It had only been 3 days since he'd first crossed the river, since Stan's voice had crackled over the phone from the safety and sanity of New York City. The groan of the Silver Bridge had been the first true sound of this place, a complaint of tired steel that vibrated through the floorboards of his Ford Falcon and settled in his teeth. Below, the Ohio River was a slick brown mussel, its surface flecked with the rust that seemed to bleed perpetually from the bridge's skeletal frame, an open wound on the landscape. The phone call had been the catalyst, the editor's voice a tinny buzz of cigar-chewing cynicism. "Art, my boy, it's a gift. Mothman. Sounds like a goddamn comic book villain. Go down there, talk to the local yokels, get some spooky pictures of trees. I want 3,000 words on these hillbillies seeing giant owls after too much moonshine. Make it funny." Funny. Art hadn't found anything funny in a long time. Not since the Chicago exposé blew up in his face, taking his career, his marriage, and his self-respect with it. This assignment wasn't a gift. It was a burial, a final shovelful of dirt on the coffin of his journalistic ambitions. Point Pleasant felt less like a town and more like a collection of buildings clinging to the riverbank out of a sheer, grim stubbornness he could almost respect. The place felt muted, the colors bled out by the perpetual overcast sky. Art checked into the Royal Court Motel, a place where the word "royal" was a cruel, peeling joke. The air in the room was a thick cocktail of damp, mildew, and the ghosts of 1,000 stale cigarettes. He tossed his satchel on the bed, the springs sighing a long, metallic protest. His reflection in the mottled bathroom mirror was a stranger, a man with the haunted eyes and ingrained slouch of a newspaperman, even though he hadn't worked for a real paper in 2 years. He was a bottom feeder now, a writer for modern enigmas, a pulp rag that paid him just enough to keep the bourbon flowing and the eviction notices at bay. He took out his notepad, the first line already written in his head. "In the shadowed hollows of Appalachia, where progress holds its breath, fear has grown wings." It was hackwork, purple prose for the credulous, but it paid the bills. The diner was a bubble of humming fluorescent light against the encroaching dusk, smelling of frying bacon and bitter coffee. He slid into a cracked vinyl booth and ordered a cup, black. His investigation began. The first interview was with a farmer named Garvey, a man whose face was a roadmap of 60 hard years, his hands looking less like flesh and more like cured leather. They sat on his porch, the wood groaning under their weight. "It were bigger'n any bird I ever saw," Garvey said, his gaze fixed on the darkening tree line. 10 foot, maybe 12-foot wingspan. Didn't flap 'em, not rightly. Just glided over the barn, silent as a sin, blotted out the stars. Art nodded, scribbling nonsense in his pad. Blotted out the stars. Good line. Very dramatic. His internal monologue was a sneering counterpoint to his feigned sincerity. Later, he met the young couple, Ricky and Donna, in the front seat of their rumbling Chevy. The dashboard was lit a ghoulish green. "We was parked out on the old Ordnance Road," Ricky said, his arm draped possessively around his girlfriend. "And these two big red lights just, come on, in the road. Weren't no car. They was too high up. And they just stared at us." Donna shivered, pulling her collar tight. It was the feeling, you know? Like everything just went dead cold. Art dutifully took their statement. Teenage hormones manifest as roadside monster, he thought. The cynicism, a comfortable, familiar coat. It was all too easy, a paint-by-numbers piece on rural hysteria. He paid a visit to the Mason County Sheriff's Department, a squat brick building that smelled of damp files, Lysol, and the faint, sad aroma of human desperation. Sheriff Miller was a man built on a scale to match the landscape, broad, weary, and deeply suspicious of anyone holding a notepad. "You're another one, then," Miller said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that seemed to emanate from his boots. He didn't bother to look up from his paperwork. "From one of them magazines." Art produced his laminated press pass, a flimsy shield of legitimacy. Miller grunted, a sound of profound existential fatigue. "There's nothing out there, Mr. Penn. We got us a big sandhill crane wintering nearby. That's what folks are seeing. That, or some kids from Gallipolis with flashlights and too much time. You want the reports, you can have 'em." He shoved a thin file across the scarred wooden desk. "Knock yourself out. Just don't go stirring folks up any more than they already are. We got real problems here without adding boogeymen to the list." The turning point, the first hairline fracture in his cynical armor, came in the form of a waitress named Mary Beth. She was young, with haunted eyes that held a permanent shadow of fear. He'd been asking her general questions about the town's mood when he mentioned the Mothman. She flinched as if struck, a coffee pot clattering from her hand onto its warmer, the sound unnaturally loud in the diner's gentle hum. Later, on her break, she sat in his booth, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea as if it were a source of life. The story spilled out of her in a low, trembling voice. She told him about driving with her boyfriend out by the TNT area, the abandoned munitions site from the war. She described the smell of the damp earth, the chill coming off the river, the way the car's headlights cut feeble tunnels into the oppressive dark. She didn't talk about a monster. She described a presence, a feeling of cosmic wrongness that settled over the car, making the radio crackle with static and the hairs on her arms stand up. And the eyes. "They weren't like animal eyes," she whispered, her gaze locked on the chipped Formica tabletop. "Animals have a spark, you know? Life. They were like red lights on a machine. Cold, but they were alive. They just looked at us." Art leaned forward, the journalist in him stirring despite himself, analyzing her. No fidgeting, no embellished details. Just the flat, recited horror of a traumatic memory. "Was it threatening? Did you feel like you were in danger?" Mary Beth shook her head slowly, a fragile bird-like movement. "No, that was the worst part of it. The strangest part. It wasn't angry. It felt sad. It felt so incredibly sad, like it knew something awful was going to happen to me, and it was sorry. Like watching a child run towards a cliff." The raw, authentic terror in her voice, the sheer illogicality of a sad monster, was a cold slap. This wasn't a story for a pulp magazine. This was a wound. It was her story that sent him out to the TNT area that night, to see for himself. A decision that had led to the silence, the pressure, and the terrible, sorrowful eyes. After his encounter, the mocking article was dead, its ashes scattered in the West Virginia dark. Art spent the next 3 days in a feverish, sleep-deprived obsession. He bought a map of Mason County and pinned it to the peeling wallpaper of his motel room, marking each sighting from the sheriff's file with a red thumbtack. A pattern emerged, stark and terrifying. The cluster of pins was thickest around the river, a dark constellation of dread with the silver bridge at its undeniable heart. He practically lived in the town's tiny library, a place that smelled of decaying paper, lemon polish, and time itself. He devoured books on local history, the brittle pages cracking under his fingers. He read about the bloody frontier wars, the constant, brutal skirmishes between settlers and the Shawnee. He found the story of Chief Cornstalk, a revered Shawnee leader of immense dignity, lured to Fort Randolph under a flag of truce in 1777 and murdered in cold blood by vengeful militiamen. With his dying breath, Cornstalk was said to have laid a curse upon the land, a prophecy of darkness and blood. Art, the cynical Chicago journalist, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the library's poor heating. It was folklore, of course. A story to explain away the region's long history of misfortune. Still, his hands trembled slightly as he copied the names of the officers present at the fort that day. Captain Arbuckle, Lieutenant Hall, Ensign Michael Penn. He stared at the last name until the letters blurred. Penn. His name. A cold knot of ice formed in his stomach. It had to be a coincidence. Penn wasn't an uncommon name. His mother's family was from this part of the country, a fact he'd always found vaguely embarrassing. A taint of the backwoods on his metropolitan ambitions, a history he'd actively ignored. But this was too much. You carry a heavy name in these parts. The voice was as dry as rustling leaves. He looked up to see the librarian, Alara, a woman who seemed as old and brittle as the books she curated. Her eyes, magnified behind thick glasses, were sharp and unnervingly knowing. She had been watching him. She had seen him poring over the fort's history. She had seen the name on his press credentials when he first came in. Some folks say a name is just a name, she continued, her Appalachian accent a low, rhythmic murmur that felt older than the hills. Others know it's a rope, stretching back through time. Pull on it, and you might just wake up what's on the other end. She beckoned him with a single, crooked finger. She led him not to the public shelves, but to a small, locked room in the back, a dusty archive that smelled of forgotten things. She laid a heavy, leather-bound volume on the table, its pages yellowed and flaking at the edges. With a trembling, arthritic finger, she pointed to a spidery line of ink from 2 centuries before. Michael Penn, B. 1751, M. Sarah Williamson, issue Samuel Penn. The line snaked down through generations, through the Civil War, through the turn of the century, a river of blood and time, ending with the name of his own father. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a direct, unbroken line. He was there, Alara whispered, the words hanging in the dusty air. Your blood was there when they broke truce, when they put the curse in the ground. Some debts ain't paid with money, Mr. Penn. Some are paid with witness. That thing out there, the one with the sad red eyes. It ain't a monster. It's a sign, a marker for a debt come due, and it knows your blood. It's showing itself to you because you're part of the debt. He stumbled out of the library into a world that was no longer solid. The concrete beneath his feet felt thin, the sky a painted backdrop about to be torn away. His entire life, his entire identity as a rational, modern man, had been a lie built on a foundation of forgotten blood guilt. He wasn't an observer here, he was a participant, dragged back through time by a name he carried like a sentence. He drove aimlessly that night, the web of roads around Point Pleasant, feeling like the strands of a spider's web, and him the trapped fly. He found himself on the road leading to the bridge, the great iron structure looming in his headlights like a cage. Then, the car died. The engine didn't sputter, it just ceased. The radio, which had been playing a faint country station, devolved into a storm of hissing static, a sound that almost formed words before dying completely. The headlights flickered once, twice, and went out, plunging him into absolute darkness. A profound silence fell, a silence with weight and texture. He felt it again, that crushing pressure, that sense of being watched by something immense. He looked up, his breath catching in his throat. There, perched on one of the highest girders of the Silver Bridge, was the Mothman. It wasn't a glimpse this time. It was clear, outlined against the faint industrial glow of the distant Ohio shore. It was 10 feet tall, its powerful legs bent at an inhuman angle, its massive wings folded tight against its body like a shroud, its head tilted, and the 2 red eyes fixed on him. They blazed in the dark, and in their light, Art saw not malice, not anger, but a bottomless, soul-crushing sorrow. A wave of knowledge, not thought, but felt, washed over him, a psychic undertow. The creature wasn't looking at him, it was looking through him, at the history coiled in his DNA. It was the land's memory given form, it was the curse made flesh, and it was showing him, Michael Penn's descendant, what the final, terrible payment for that ancient sin would be. The bridge. It was going to be the bridge. The next morning he burst into Sheriff Miller's office, a wild-eyed madman reeking of fear and cheap bourbon. He spread his map on the desk, the pins, and scribbled notes a diagram of his insanity. "It's the bridge!" he yelled, his voice cracking, spittle flying from his lips. "The sightings, the curse, my family, it's all connected. It's a warning. The bridge is going to collapse." He told Miller everything, a torrent of words about Cornstalk, about his ancestor, about the creature's sorrowful, prophetic eyes. Miller listened with a stony, impassive expression, his gaze shifting from Art's frantic eyes to the half-empty bottle of bourbon peeking from his coat pocket. When Art was finished, gasping for breath, Miller slowly rose from his chair and walked to the door, opening it. "Son," he said, his voice dangerously soft and full of a terrible pity, "you've been chasing spooks in the woods too long. You got yourself so wound up in this town's ghost story you wrote yourself into it. Go back to your motel, sleep it off, or get the hell out of my town before I have to lock you up for starting a panic." Defeated, Art tried to warn others. He spoke to people in the diner, his voice urgent and pleading. They stared at him, their faces masks of pity and suspicion, whispering behind their hands as he left. He was the outsider, the big city journalist who had succumbed to the local superstitions. His desperation was the proof of his insanity. His final call was to Stan. He tried to explain the real story, the weight of it, the terror. Stan laughed, a harsh, grating sound over the line. "A family curse? Jesus, Art, you've really lost it. I'm killing the story. And you're fired. Send me your expense report." The line went dead. He was utterly alone, the sole prophet of a doom no one would believe, his knowledge a curse in itself. December 15, 1967. The day dawned cold and gray, the sky a seamless, oppressive sheet of lead. A damp chill seeped into the motel room, into Art's very bones. There was nothing left to do. He was a ghost at the feast, a helpless witness to a future he couldn't change. He stood at the window of his room, which overlooked the river, the bourbon bottle on the nightstand untouched. He was past the point of wanting to numb the feeling. He had to feel it all. It was his penance. It was late afternoon, the beginning of the evening rush. The Silver Bridge was choked with a slow-moving artery of cars and trucks, their headlights beginning to prick the growing twilight. Families heading home from Christmas shopping, workers returning from the Ohio side. A whole world of mundane, beautiful life, suspended over the dark, indifferent water. And then he saw it. One last time, high above the center span of the bridge, a dark shape circled. It was a silent, patient sentinel, a vulture waiting for the inevitable. It made no sound, cast no shadow against the bruised sky. It simply watched, its duty almost done. The sound was not loud at first, but it was fundamental, a note of pure failure. A single, resonant pop that seemed to come from the core of the bridge itself, a sound that vibrated up through the soles of Art's shoes. It was the snap of a single, overburdened eyebar in the northern suspension chain, a link forged half a century ago, now giving up its ghost. For a heartbeat, a terrible suspended moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like the world tearing in half, a groaning, shrieking cacophony of tortured, shearing metal, the bridge began to die. It twisted, the roadway contorting like the broken back of a great iron beast. The entire structure shuddered, swayed with a sickening lurch, and then folded in on itself, collapsing into the freezing Ohio River in less than a minute. Art watched, paralyzed, his mind unable to process the sheer physics of the destruction as cars, trucks, and human beings were swallowed by the churning, debris-filled water. The air erupted in a pandemonium of distant sirens, shattering steel, and the faint, terrible chorus of human screams carried on the wind. He ran from the room, stumbling towards the riverbank, joining the horrified townspeople who could do nothing but stare at the mangled steel and the dark, violent void where their lifeline had been. He looked up, his face streaked with tears. He didn't realize he was crying. The sky was empty. Its messenger had delivered its warning, the debt had been paid, and its long watch was over. Arthur Penn never wrote a story about the Mothman, not for a magazine. He wrote the truth, a long, rambling confession on motel stationery, a testament to a warning he was powerless to make anyone believe. He left it in the room when he checked out and drove away from Point Pleasant, a man hollowed out by a truth far stranger and more terrible than any fiction. He would live out his days a changed man, his cynicism burned away and replaced by the heavy, leaden certainty that history is not a dead thing. It is a current that flows through blood and soil, a series of debts that are never forgotten. And sometimes, when a debt is ancient enough, the land itself will send a witness to ensure the payment is seen by the eyes of the damned. After the collapse of the Silver Bridge, which claimed 46 lives, the creature that had haunted the skies of Point Pleasant was never officially sighted again. The archives are now closed for the night. For more files unsealed from the shadows of American history, subscribe to the Folklore Archives. Your next case file is just one click away.